Groundhog Day may be one of the clearest cinematic parallels to A Course in Miracles because the film is essentially about a mind trapped inside repetition until perception changes. Not circumstances first, perception first. Bill Murray's character, Phil Connors, begins fully identified with the ego thought system. Cynical, self-centered, manipulative, emotionally defended, superiority-driven, disconnected from genuine relationship. He lives through comparison, life performance, irritation, and control. ACIM would say he is asleep inside the ego dream. Then comes the loop. The same day repeats endlessly. That is extraordinarily ACIM-like. The Course describes the ego as cyclical repetition. Same grievances, same fears, same defenses, same desires, same patterns, wearing different costumes. The ego calls this living, but spiritually it is mechanical repetition. Phil initially tries to solve the loop egoically. Indulgence, pleasure, manipulation, seduction, theft, nihilism, intellectual control. Nothing works. Why? Because external rearrangement cannot heal internal fragmentation. That is central in ACM. The ego believes salvation lies in getting, controlling, winning, escaping, being admired, avoiding pain. But the loop remains because the underlying mind remains unchanged. And then the film gets darker. Phil falls into despair. Repeated suicide attempts fail. This matters spiritually. The ego eventually exhausts itself because separation consciousness cannot produce lasting fulfillment. ACM repeatedly says the ego's system ultimately leads to exhaustion because it promises completion through what cannot truly satisfy. Phil reaches the point where pleasure fails, control fails, specialness fails, escape fails. That collapse becomes the beginning of transformation. Not punishment, disillusionment. Then something subtle changes. Phil starts paying attention, really paying attention, to people, to suffering, to moments, to kindness, to presence. This is where the movie shifts from ego survival to miracle-mindedness. He begins extending rather than extracting. That distinction is enormous in ACIM. The ego asks, what can I get from this? Love asks, what can extend through me here? Phil gradually stops using people as objects in his self-story, especially Rita Hansen-Naum. At first, Rita is an ego target: approval, romance, validation, specialness. Phil studies her mechanically to manipulate attraction. That is the ego's version of relationship, strategy disguised as love. But every manipulative attempt fails ultimately because love cannot be manufactured through control. ACIM repeatedly distinguishes special relationship from holy relationship. The special relationship says, you complete me. I need you to validate my identity. The holy relationship becomes a space of genuine joining without possession. Phil slowly shifts toward actual care, not performance, not seduction, not self-enhancement, care. And then the loop itself becomes a classroom. That is perhaps the deepest ACIM overlap. The world is not necessarily punishment. It becomes a learning environment for forgiveness, awareness, and reinterpretation. The same external conditions that once felt imprisoning become opportunities for extension and awakening. Phil learns piano, helps strangers, catches the falling child, serves quietly, develops patience. Importantly, these acts stop being transactional. At first, he behaves well partly to escape the loop. Eventually, the kindness becomes natural rather than strategic. That is spiritually significant. The ego can imitate goodness for reward. Transformation softens the reward-seeking structure itself. Another huge ACIM resonance: time. Phil appears trapped in linear time, but psychologically he is really trapped in unconscious repetition. ACIM similarly says the ego perpetuates itself through time. Past grievances, future anxieties, identity, continuity. But genuine presence interrupts psychological time. Phil becomes increasingly present to life rather than merely moving through it. And then comes the key shift. The loop ends not when Phil forces reality to change, but when his relationship to reality changes. That is almost the entire ACM path in one sentence. The Course does not promise control over form. It invites healing of perception. Phil wakes up beside Rita on a new day only after the inner structure organizing his experience has fundamentally softened. Not perfected, softened. There is also something beautiful about how ordinary the awakening becomes. No cosmic fireworks, no spiritual grandiosity, just warmth, presence, humility, participation, care. ACM often points in this direction too. Real awakening is not necessarily becoming metaphysically impressive. It may look more like less defensiveness, less manipulation, less fear, less self-obsession, more availability to love now. And perhaps the deepest state of Groundhog Day through ACIM is this: hell is not repetition itself. Hell is unconscious repetition. The miracle is not escaping life, but becoming present enough within it that the repetition no longer defines identity. The same world remains, but the perceiver is no longer the same.